I was involved with a group of 10 women who embarked on disarming a Hawk fighter jet. So the 4 women that did the actual disarming work took hammers to it and took it out of commission. If they'd run away afterwards, that would be completely understandable. But I believe that the power of it is that they stayed there to explain why they did it. And by doing that, they brought the confrontational edge right up against the powers. They were acquitted by a Liverpool jury. That was history. It was all over the front pages of the papers. It went international. What was significant about it, really, was ordinary people can participate, even if there's only 10 of you. You can do this.
Hello and welcome to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Every week I interview experts who are battling to save our planet. My guests are scientists, politicians, academics, journalists and activists. They explain the complexities of the energy, economic, political and cultural crises we face today, revealing what's really going on and what they think needs to be done. These are the stories of the big picture. Go to planetcritical.com to learn more and subscribe. My guest this week is Rowan Tilly. Rowan is a peace activist and a climate change activist, and she has been active for decades. She was one of 4 women who, in 1996, damaged a warplane bound for Indonesia, who at the time was engaging in violent action against both the people of East Timor and West Papua, one of which it continues to occupy. She's since been involved in Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil and has risked prison many times in her life. In short, she is an expert and practitioner of non-violent action. And that was what I asked her on the show to discuss. I wanted to know, are there contexts in which non-violent action needs to be supplemented with what might be considered violence? Can we truly consider acts taken in self-defense as violence? If we think about the collective body and the violence it is suffering, if we take action against it which could be considered violent, could we also defend it as self-defense? I'm thinking about these questions all the time at the moment because I'm writing about them in my book. As I say to Rowan, I'm also suspicious that we exist in the same political context as we did 5 years ago, where protest and civil disobedience were effective modes of raising awareness and challenging power. Given the onslaught against the Palestinian people that breaks international law, given the Israeli government have experienced no recourse for breaking international law from the most powerful actors in the world, given the United Kingdom is jailing climate activists at a faster rate than anywhere else, given the British government recently prescribed a protest group as terrorists, do we exist in a world where civilized protest works still? This is what we set out to discuss, and it's a really wonderful conversation. We explore the nuances and complexities of non-violence, self-defense, defense, the successes of protests, the meaning behind them, and the tactics that non-violence uses to provoke responses and highlight injustices. I'm so grateful to Rowan for coming on. As I say to her at the end, she is nothing but graceful in the face of some of my challenges. And this conversation has certainly helped me think through some of this question. I hope it does for you too. I hope you all enjoy the episode. If you do, please share it far and wide. And if you're loving the show, become a patron on Patreon or support Planet Critical with a paid subscription at planetcritical.com. By signing up, you'll get the Planet Critical newsletter inspired by each episode delivered straight to your inbox every week. You'll also have access to the wonderful Planet Critical community who are full of inspiring thoughts, ideas, critiques, and determination. The links are in the description box below. I'm so grateful to everyone who chooses to support the project. I'm a vehement believer in ad-free and open access content, so Planet Critical wouldn't exist without the direct support of the amazing community. Thank you so much to all of you who believe in Planet Critical and keep the project going every week. Rowan, thank you so much for joining me on Planet Critical. It is a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm really excited for this conversation today. It's been in the works for a couple of months. But before we kind of dig into our main topic of discussion, which will reveal itself, can you tackle the first question? Why is the world in crisis?
Yeah, my first response to that is a mix of a response from my scientific background as an ecologist and partly related to my meditation practice. I'm a fairly hardcore meditator. through my meditation practice, I've learned about reification, which is a bit of a heavy-duty word that means something like fixing things or literalizing things excessively and imputing a kind of false meaning into them or a false weight into them. And the way that I think this manifests in our society is through reductive scientific materialism, another heavy term. But the way in which our society has become, first of all, oriented towards the scientific approach, which is what came in after religion got thrown out the door. And then everything being reduced to the material. And so if you add to that reification, it's the fixing or literalizing of the material world. So we put a false sense of value on things like money and power, and greed comes to the fore, hatred comes to the fore. And this happened at a time when we chucked out religion, which in some ways was a good thing, because religions have been incredibly oppressive and divisive in our society. But unfortunately, what happened alongside that was that we also threw out ethics, and we threw out, we became, it's not that we threw out, but we came separated from things like a sense of beauty, a sense of the sacred, appreciation of the arts. So all the good stuff got thrown out along with this. And I've recently come across a scientist who's really nailed this stuff in my view. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Ian McGilchrist. Have you heard of him? Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
He wrote a book. I think the title is The Master and His Emissary, and I think the subtitle is The Divided Brain. So he talks about the left brain bias and the right that we're in left brain bias at the moment in our culture, and there's also the right brain, which we've kind of moved away from. And it's really interesting to me because when one meditates, you're basically sitting in the right brain. So you're sitting in this place that is a source of the sacred, of a sense of beauty, appreciation of the arts. When all of those things move into the left brain, particularly in relation to the sense of the sacred, it gets turned into what has come to be referred to as woo. I don't know if you've heard that term. So woo or woo-woo. Some people use the word woo-woo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Woo-woo.
Yeah. In England, it gets shortened to just woo. Okay. So so you could say that woo is a left brain phenomenon. So in other words, the sense of the sacred gets reified and fixed and literalized. If I can think of a sort of crude example of that, the idea of, say, for example, healing, people will reify something like a crystal and say, this is going to heal me, and they mean it in this sort of almost a scientific sense, but they don't frame it like that. But from the right brain point of view, that isn't how it is. It's the left brain's crude interpretation of how we heal ourselves. The way that materializes is with fundamentalism. Okay, so in a way, we're living in a fundamentalist world. I'm not talking about religion here, though, although you could say it was a religion. Is this scientific materialism? It's a fundamentalist point of view. Instead of using science as a tool and something helpful, and instead of using the material world as a way to support us in the good stuff, in things like a sense of beauty, a sense of the sacred, of human values that are really important to us, like trust and truth. Those are chucked out because it doesn't fit in the fundamentalist worldview, because fundamentalism is coming from the left brain, right? So I think that this is sort of underlying. I'm really talking about a root. When I look at why, I think, okay, what's the root cause? And I think this is one of the root causes, is this leaning into the left brain, leaning into fundamentalism, greed, scientific materialism, and reducing everything to the material. So that's one of the key things.
I think that following on from the sort of like Cartesian tradition, Descartes, who didn't believe that other biological creatures could feel pain, for example, and would sort of dissect dogs, do live vivisections because he was so convinced of this, has sort of, helped create this culture of human supremacy without a shadow of a doubt. And also as if there is some kind of divide between this like rationalistic reach for reasoning, which and any means to get there is justified, and versus this other, the human culture part of us, which is the sacred and the beauty and the values and the things that we co-create together, the things that cannot be dissected, but rather are grown and interwoven. I think I would maybe disagree with you about the reification of the material. I come to the same, how do I put this? I come from the same position as you. I agree with kind of the conclusion, but I don't think it is a reification of the material. I think it's a reification of the concepts that you were describing, like power and greed. Because I think if we were to reify, to make the concept of something as if real, the material world, I think that could actually lead to a sense of sacredness. In a sense, if we were to consider the possibility of sacredness and beauty in the material world. Do you see what I mean?
I do. And I absolutely agree. It's a misconstruing on a conceptual level of and you're absolutely right, because the material world is something sacred, but because it's coming from the left brain, that isn't seen. It can only be seen in the right brain. And because we have this bias, we're constantly turning towards, reality being this, and not seeing the beauty of it. So I think we are on the same page, actually, on that.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I could spend a day and a half with you talking about that book, because The Master and Emissary took my breath away when I read it. It's really quite amazing. And I love that how he sort of posits as well at the introduction, like none of this might be true, but here is my hypothesis based on, all of the different kind of neurological and philosophical traditions as to how the parts of our brain might be interacting. Just really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to let us go down there.
And I'm done with that. I just wanted to mention it as one of the strands that I think, and it probably does lead into other strands. I mean, I can think of another strand which I think is really important, is that there's a failure to engage and participate in the world. And I think that is also coming from this left brain bias. It's a failure of being able to discover our power and simultaneously take up the responsibility that should go with that power.
That's interesting.
And so, we're getting people who are just running away with power. And meanwhile, the people who are being, manipulated in all sorts of, terrifying ways, are not seeing their responsibility to stop that from happening, I see the ultra rich and the the terribleness that's coming out of that, and which is a big, that's another major strand, is the super rich. But in a way, what underlies that is not so much the super rich as the fact that we've allowed this to happen. You know, that the general populations, the public, you know, are not preventing it. And they're not preventing it because they don't recognize their power, and they're not stepping up to their responsibility. You know, in tribal times, those people, they would have been prevented from abusing it in any way, because there would have been this other side, which would be, you know, human values like humility, for example. And so other people in the tribe would come forward with the other values that would balance that. So it's the lack of balance in a way.
I think there's also, you know, human beings have organized themselves very differently throughout history. That we know for sure.
Yeah.
And I think in the context of what you're saying, for me, what I always tend to think about is the fact that people were literally interdependent on one another and on their environment, on the land, on Mother Earth. And so to exploit your neighbor was almost an impossibility because you were dependent on your neighbor in order to survive.
Exactly.
And there's an interesting contrast with like the super rich, because obviously they are fundamentally dependent on our exploitation in order to accumulate so much wealth, but we can't reach them, or it's very difficult to reach them. And so it's very difficult to design protest actions, which actually speaks to the fundamental relationship between the people and the abuser, the exploiter.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. In a way, you know, everything's separated, isn't it? There's this part of our culture is this individualizing and separating each other so that we can't come together to organize. We can't so easily share our thoughts and our dreams, you know, and things like the arts, you know, are muted. And so we're not coming together around beauty. We don't gather for our spiritual sustenance, you know, for a sense of the sacred. And so this separation it is creating that problem. And going back to the thing about engagement and participation, it also stops people from coming together to organise, because one person on their own can't do anything about this.
Yes, exactly.
And I reject, I don't know if you're aware, there was this video that went viral that was basically people saying, just do it. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
So lots of different people coming in for a short period of time saying, just do it. And it was clear to me that what they were referring to was assassinate Trump, right?
Oh, right. Yeah? Okay, gotcha.
Just do it. They couldn't say assassinate Trump because they would have been arrested. They were in the US, right? But everybody's clear what's being spoken of here. To which I say, it won't do it. It won't do it. It won't solve the problem, because the problem is much more deeply rooted. It's no good just assassinating people. For one thing, that would be violent. For another thing, we don't know whether part of what's going on is because there's something not quite right in their minds, you know, which I have a suspicion about with some of these people. And there again, that goes back to the left brain thing. If somebody's too stuck in their left brain, then that's a problem.
I want to stop on what you just said, that, you know, something like that, an action like that, assassinating Trump, let's take him as an example, would be violent. Let's go in from this point here, because there is a legal defense of self-defense, whereby if somebody is attacking you and you use appropriate force, but that appropriate force results in their death, you will not be charged with murder, for example. Now, that can be quite, it's very particular to the individual. I had explained to me that, for example, if I was being attacked as a woman and sort of got a blunt object and managed to stop my attacker, who is a man, then that could qualify as appropriate use of force, because I am fundamentally at the disadvantage from being smaller. But if a big rugby player was to sort of do the same, then that's not appropriate use of force, because they may have been able to restrain their attacker, for example. So it's very nuanced. I have to say this. It's very, very, very nuanced, and this is not legal advice. But I am very curious as to this idea, even within our legal system, of there being a case for self-defense, and for self-defense somebody sometimes being a violent use of force.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of, let's say Donald Trump, who, along with his cronies, is enacting a huge amount of violence against the American people, against the territory of what is known as the United States, against Earth's body, threatening to sort of invade sovereign territories north of the border and out in the sea. Is there a case where taking a violent action against somebody like that could be considered a form of defense? In your opinion, not legally.
Yeah, I think what I want to do is separate out situations where there's one-on-one situations, right? So a situation where a woman is being attacked by a man, using self-defense, absolutely, of course, in a situation like that, that makes sense, that you do whatever you can to get yourself free and get yourself safe. And I think non-violence has got nothing to do with that,
Why?
Because when we're talking about non-violence, we're talking about a collective action. It's a movement thing. It's a group thing. It's that we do this together in an organised way. But just to also go back to the one-on-one situation, there's another element that's really important to what you were talking about there, which is intention. And this is also recognised in law, that the law will test what's the motivation, what's the intention. Did this person premeditatively decide to create a situation where they could murder them, That would be murder. But if that person's only intention is, I want to get free, if you accidentally kill that person in the process of defending yourself, you wouldn't be found guilty, I hope, because if the law does its job properly, it tests out what's the motivation and the intention, and it checks that that's, somehow they have a way to verify it. So intention and orientation is key, and it's also key in non-violence. So it's like, what are we oriented towards here? Is the first question. What are we trying to make happen? And another characteristic that's really key to it is context. What's the context? So the context in Britain at the moment, I mean, it's fast changing at the moment as well. But if I can talk about, say, Britain a year ago even, very different context to what's happening in the US at the moment, And I would not presume to, advise people in a detailed way about how they should carry out their non-violence in a situation like that. I do believe it's possible, because I see examples of it all over the world. But coming from the UK, as I do, in my limited context, I wouldn't presume to say how they should carry out their non-violence. In fact, I've talked with student activists from Uganda who approached me in my, capacity as a sort of experienced expert on non-violence. They came to get advice about how should they wanted to be non-violent, how should they do that in Uganda. And I shared a lot of information and training scripts and so on with them. And I kept impressing upon them, you must interpret this according to your situation, because I can't do that for you because I'm not there. So that's really important. And amazingly, they will keep coming back to me saying, we pray for our opponents, The depth of their non-violence was breathtaking, So,
I struggle to kind of, I struggle on both sides of this, right? I struggle with the idea of violence being deployed I struggle with the idea of an anti-ecocide movement remaining wholly non-violent, say, when power has been so centralized and so corrupted that it really does seem that there is very little attention being paid to the wants and the desires, not just of the British public, but the public all around the world. I mean, there was a story in The Guardian recently that upwards of 80% of all adult humans on this planet want more climate action, and we are going in the opposite way. And so I've also kind of struggled with this idea of trying to figure out like where my body ends and the collective body begins, and this really rather spiritual kind of notion that this work has given me about belonging to a collective body. And then sort of feeling like, well, that is violence being inflicted upon my collective body. That is violence being inflicted against our capacity for reproductive work. It's violence being inflicted against bodies, and I belong to these bodies, and these bodies are also me. And so would it be violent if we defended ourselves from this? And this is where I've gotten to.
Yeah. And the thing is, the bottom line is you can't take something down using the same tools with which it was put up there, you know.
Audre Lorde.
I think Einstein, there's a few people that have said something to the same effect. Einstein said it. Edmund Burke, I think, is another person who said it. And it's so true. And I've seen it so many times. There's something about non-violence that when it's practiced at its best, it can absolutely get under the skin of what put the violence there in the first place, which is what, you know, I'm advocating this not out of some kind of spiritual woo-woo thing that we should all be nice to each other. It's because it works. And, you know, there's lots of definitions of non-violence. The one that I work to is taking action to confront injustice. So these are the key words: confront injustice without violence and with grit. So many people, when they hear you talking about non-violence, they think of silent vigils and you know, people sort of appearing to be very peaceful, right? And they're not wrong in that, but that just happens to be a very subtle manifestation of non-violence that is probably based in a faith tradition. So, for example, the Quakers will typically have a silent vigil, and sometimes if you can spot it, you can see that there is a confrontational edge there. But more typically, when there's a violent situation going on, or just to attend to the violence that's coming at us, there needs to be some kind of confrontational edge. Otherwise, the non-violence will not work. So this is the grit. The grit gives the traction that creates change. And this is what, you know, I've been involved with Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, and Just Stop Oil, and before that, many other environmental campaigns and also peace campaigns. I mean, the most famous one, if you like, is I was involved with a group of 10 women who embarked on disarming a Hawk fighter jet plane by disarming it, claiming that as an act of non-violence, because there's nothing that you can do with the fighter jet that can make it in any way usable in a way that isn't violent. It's a weapon. And so it's right, it's proper to disarm something that's improper like that. So the 4 women that did the actual disarming work took hammers to it and took it out of commission. 13 million quid's worth of warplane.
Wow.
And stayed there afterwards. There's the power. They stayed there afterwards to explain why they did it. If they'd run away afterwards, that would be completely understandable, and that is one way of doing actions. But I believe that the power of it, and this is what made it non-violent as well, is that they stayed there to explain why they did it. And by doing that, they brought the confrontational edge right up against the powers in the way that needed to happen. So very often, I've done covert property damage myself, and what I've found is that very often when people do that, the company will just disappear it. They won't even acknowledge that it's happened because it's not in their interests to do so. They don't want to bring public attention to what they're doing. And so by being accountable, you're not just accounting for yourself, you're forcing them to account for what they're doing. And in this case of this action against the Hawk fighter jet, there was the 4 women went on remand for 6 months, and we knew that would happen. So, not something to take lightly. There was a lot of preparation and care that went into shaping the action up. And then they went on trial, and they were acquitted by a Liverpool jury. That was history, It was all over the front pages of the papers. It went international. But what was significant about it, really, was ordinary people can participate and engage with the violence that's coming at us and do something about it. Even if there's only 10 of you, you can do this. And the result of that was that East Timor, which is what the action was about, it was that Indonesia was using these Hawk warplanes made by the UK to repress the people of East Timor. People hadn't even heard of East Timor, when we did the action. By the time we'd finished the action, they knew about East Timor, and they knew that Britain was making Hawks to oppress people in East Timor and also in Papua New Guinea. So
West Papua.
So we force the accountability of the government and the Indonesians, and then recognition.
And what changed?
Sorry, I'm coming to that. So what changed was recognition, first of all, not for us, but for two resistance leaders in East Timor. One was a bishop, Bishop Balo. He was very radical. He was East Timor is a Catholic country, or most of the people there are predominantly Catholic. He was offering shelter, and I don't know what else he was up to, but he was up to some pretty radical stuff. And also the exiled president, Jose Ramos Horta. They were given the joint Nobel Peace Prize. So mega recognition. That happened just a year later. That East Timor had been all over the papers. All the torture, the repression, the incredible human rights crimes that had been happening. And then these two guys get given the Nobel Peace Prize. Another 2 years on from that, East Timor wins its independence. They're liberated now. Are a free country. Indonesia was chucked out. Now, I'm not claiming that was all to do with our action, but I think our action played a really significant role in precipitating change. And East Timor recognises that as well, because 20 years after this happened, we were invited to a celebration event in East Timor to celebrate 20 years of their independence. So they recognised us, the part that we played in it. And of course, there were many other parts to be played, but to get it into the West, into the sort of the newspapers of the people who have the power, as it were, was highly significant for them. And very significant for us was that a letter was smuggled out of an Indonesian prison where they had their own resistance. Their resistance leader was in prison, and he smuggled out this letter to thank us for putting out this warplane, he did that at great risk to himself. And he thanked us that we didn't harm the pilot, right? He said, you took out a plane and you didn't even harm the pilot. That really moved me, that somebody in his situation would say that. So, yeah.
What was the independence movement like in East Timor? Was it wholly non-violent, or were there elements of violence to it? I assume that they were defending themselves.
Yeah, they were defending themselves. My sense of it is that it was mostly non-violent. I think it would have been very difficult for it to have been anything else. If there were acts of violence, well, I would call it like you're calling it, self-defense, and and I wouldn't judge it because, again, I'm not in that context. I wasn't there.
So you do think that there are contexts in which the use of violence in defense is defensible?
I think it's defensible in certain situations. Yeah, I'm not a pacifist.
Right.
So being non-violent doesn't mean that you're a pacifist. It means that you're non-violent. So, non-violence can be highly strategic as well as principled. I mean, I'm both. I use it as a strategy, but I'm holding the strategy within a wider framework of principles. I think a lot of their actions were around covert property damage,
sabotage. Okay.
Yeah, and, which, I'm not going to judge that. I mean, I would even frame that as non-violent in that context.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, during the Second World War, when the Nazis occupied Denmark, they did non-violent stuff. The resistance movement in Denmark was incredible. They completely, baffled. The Nazis couldn't come against them in the end. And the way they did it was they did things like they turned the street signs around so that the Nazis couldn't orient themselves around their cities because they didn't know their way around. Well, of course, the locals did. So they did things like that, but they also blew stuff up. They used incendiaries against property. But I'm not going to say, I'm not going to judge that.
Well, exactly. I know I have a friend of a friend whose grandfather is a Cretan, okay? And during the Second World War, the very first, and I think in the history of warfare, the very first place that soldiers were dropped in, like had to parachute in, was on the island of Crete. Yeah. And the Nazis arrived, but they'd sort of miscalculated the weather, so they'd gotten a little bit dispersed, essentially, on the mountains. And what the Nazis hadn't considered is that, as one Greek put it to me, Cretans are fucking crazy. And so the Cretans came out and fought with the Nazis, essentially, with their farming equipment. And in the basement of a friend of a friend's grandfather's house is the skeleton of a Nazi soldier that he killed, that he still holds on to because he thinks it's important to remember what the toll of the Second World War and also what defending against fascism really looked like in his local context. Yeah. And if we look at, I wish there was no war, right? I obviously, it's what a glib thing to say, but obviously I wish there was no war. And I really resent the idea of ever having to defend. And I resent the moments where I have had to defend myself with violence from violence. But I think that if we are literally talking about the sixth mass extinction event in the history of human Earth, which we are, if we are literally talking about the biggest wealth disparity known to man, which is driving people into poverty despite there being enough resources to go around, that same accumulation triggering a biodiversity crisis, if we're talking about our kinfolk being killed off every day, species disappearing every day, I mean, is this not the most extraordinary act of violence that we are ever witness to, that is coming at us from all all levels, and that will only get worse, whose violences are only going to exponentially sort of perpetuate them, then I think in this context, alongside, and I should have made this clear, alongside non-violence, because it is so important that there are parts of the movement that maintain non-violence and essentially hold the boundaries of how people can organize themselves. Yeah. I think I think it's defensible. I think it's defensible if people begin to take what is considered to be violent actions in the name of self-defense. And this is kind of what I keep going over in my head. I mean, if we are talking about the extinguishment of life and bodies every single day, then how is it not okay to defend ourselves?
Okay, I think it is defensible. And like I hope it's clear now that I would never judge this. The reason I go back to non-violence is because it's effective. And it's effective, I'm acting within the context of the UK. It's effective in the UK. My whole life I've been an activist from age 8. I did my first non-violent action at age 8, and it was successful as well. And that was purely on instinct. And almost everything that I've done has been effective. And that's not anything to do with me, it's to do with the method. And that's why I would use non-violence, that it works in this context. And I think in many other contexts in the global north, the West, I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah, I know. I get you.
I was in Seattle in 1999, the big mass mobilization against the World Trade Organization. I have never seen such a powerful non-violent resistance as... do you know about the case? So
not very much. No.
So there was the World Trade Organization was having this massive globalization meeting, loads of delegates coming, and the idea was to close down the convention center using non-violence, and those, as far as I'm aware, very young organizers did the most fantastic job of organizing this non-violent resistance against it. They closed the convention center down. They also negotiated with the Black Bloc that they would keep their actions to the outer perimeter of Seattle, and only, I think it was time-bound as well, so they're only doing that in the evening or something like that. I'm not too sure about the time-bound, but certainly there was a very clear demarcation, and the Black Bloc respected the non-violence in the main part of the city around the convention centre. And the police threw everything at it. It was like pepper spray, tear gas, horses, beatings, rubber bullets, curfew. People were imprisoned. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And people maintained the non-violent discipline in the face of that. So this is, it was tremendously successful. Some of the wins there were not even reported in the papers. The Carry On, the ripples went out for a long time afterwards. So and again, if I can go to Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain, again, because we were able to maintain a clear boundary around our non-violence, which is necessary, I think. So you can have other people using other tactics, right? You can have the diverse tactics. But the space around non-violence needs to be very tight and very boundaried. And the people who are taking non-violent action need to be incredibly disciplined about the way they're doing stuff. And that can sound a bit like absolutist or a bit controlling, but it isn't really.
No, I get it.
It isn't really. It's just the necessity of when you're on the street. If you want to use that confrontational edge that I was talking about, you need to create very clear and safe boundaries around it, and then you can use your grit, if you like. And in the face of that, anyone that came against us, they exposed their own violence. It's almost like once you've done something non-violence, it's almost like you don't need to do anything anymore, because the opponents, they expose themselves in a way with just the fact that they're coming up against us. And that's where the power of it is.
But this is the thing now. Like, what is the power of it? Because in response to the effectiveness of Extinction Rebellion at drawing awareness to the climate crisis and the government's inactivity, because I think the non-violent action was instrumental in building a public consciousness as to the reality of environmental destruction. Totally. But in response to that, once Just Stop Oil came onto the scene, the British government essentially illegalized protest, making it very, very, very difficult for people to engage in any sort of not even civil disobedience. I mean, walking down the road, for God's sakes, you essentially cannot do that in the UK anymore. Then when Defend Our Juries, the campaign was set up in order to highlight to people that, you know, a jury has the right to acquit with regards to your consciousness, your moral clarity. Then they started arresting those protesters for standing outside, you know, a courtroom with, you know, placards, essentially. Just a week ago, Palestine Action was prescribed as a terrorist organization for taking sabotage against, you know, Elbit, who in the biggest Israeli weapons manufacturing site, and successfully shutting down a couple of weapons manufacturing sites because they were effective. So this is the thing, you know, when we talk about the effectiveness or the success of actions now, I guess I sort of worry about it because I think that you absolutely can see these like local benefits, these local successes. But when it comes to the wider context of this like ongoing extractivism and exploitation and the deliberate disintegration of our communities and the illegalizing of our right to choose to say no, to band together, then I wonder now whether or not we do still have any power to kind of go out into the streets and be listened to. Because, you know, yes, you know, there's agreed to be like no more exploitation of oil in the North Sea, but the United Kingdom is going to rely on renewable energy, which has huge consequences to countries like Colombia and Ecuador and Congo, etc., and, you know, our biodiversity. If you look at the fact that there's been hundreds of thousands of people in the street protesting against Palestine, and nothing essentially has changed. There has not been a single drop in numbers of Palestinian women, children and men killed despite the global outrage. The United Kingdom has taken, you know, a year and a half for one of its governments to essentially begin to vaguely, you know, morally question what is going on, but still not enough to ever come out and sort of take sanctions against this country, despite doing it to Russia. I mean, you can hear I'm getting quite emotional about this. I'm so worried. I am so worried about no longer existing in a system where democratic processes count, and falling prey to thinking that they do count, they do still matter, and that this is an action that we can take, not necessarily non-violence, but any kind of protest, which will eventually result in something changing.
Let me explain something else about the way that non-violence works, because it's complex, right?
Please.
One of the ways that it works is by keeping the moral high ground. And that moral high ground works best in a democracy, or a situation where the country and the people in power are pretending that there's a democracy. That's good enough. If they're pretending, that will work. So we've got the moral high ground, and we've got, and it's not just, we're not just playing a game here, doing a strategic thing of we're right and you're wrong. We really mean it, right? We have to really mean it. And one of the things that we bring in, which is a balancer to the confrontational edge, is humility. So when we come in with our non-violent actions, we're not saying we've got the answer. What we're saying is we need a dialogue, and we need everybody to engage and participate in this dialogue. We need to bring in all the parties, including the opponents. We bring them in too. We're not saying they can't be part of it. And that's very difficult to fight against, because we're so reasonable, right? You know, and we're not trying to impose an answer. What we're calling for is democracy, real democracy, where everyone comes to the table and we look for the solutions, because we don't have them. We don't have the power to have them. We don't have the knowledge ourselves. But we do know that when people come together and participate and engage, we hopefully these solutions will emerge out of that dialogue. So that's what we're trying to get. And we also come with our vulnerability, right? Now, how counterintuitive is that? You know, you face the forces of darkness, this incredible violence that is coming at us. We confront it with our vulnerability. And that means that people are witnessing what we're doing. They see the reasonableness of what we're doing, and they see how vulnerable we are. So 4 women hammering a Hawk warplane, trying to take out the entire, British Army Strait, they're just 4 women with household hammers. There's not a whole lot of power there. And yet there is. The power is so understated that they can't smash us. And this is where, in a certain way, it affords us some protection. The non-violence affords us some protection because they can't smash us when we come with our reasonableness, our human values, and our humility. If they are pretending to be a democracy, which they are in Britain at the moment, then they can't afford to smash people like that. And I think,
but they have.
Well,
hang on,
no, wait.
But they have. They have smashed people like that. They have prescribed a protest group as a terrorist. They have sent more climate activists to jail than any other country in the world. Yes, any other Western country in the world by a factor of like 10. I mean, the UK is hammering down on us.
There's a definition thing here. Palestine action, in the broadest terms, you could say that it was non-violent. But in terms of the specifics of the way that they were taking action on the street, it wouldn't fit the definition of non-violence that I'm talking about. And I
thought you said earlier that property damage could be non-violent.
Yeah, and Just Stop Oil has done property damage as well. But it's about the way that it's done. And I mean no criticism to Palestine action. I believe that the actions that they were taking were not violent in that sense. The actions that it took about against property. Some people would construe that as a non-violent act. I wouldn't, and I mean that in no criticism of them. They had their own definition of non-violence, I guess. Maybe I don't know whether. In fact, my understanding is that they didn't frame themselves as non-violent. And here's where it really here's where the problem really lies. Because when Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain took action, and Extinction Rebellion, we frame ourselves as non-violent. We name ourselves on the website every time we put a press release, non-violence, non-violence, non-violence. We're putting it forward all the time, and part of that is our protection. And it means that if you keep saying you're non-violent, it's harder for them to then call us terrorists. And I'm sure that Suella Braverman would have loved to stick a terrorist label on us. But they couldn't. It didn't fit. It kept sliding off, So they were never able to do that. And the key thing there as well is the accountability. So when the 4 women hammered the Hawk warplane, they stayed afterwards to explain why they did it. And if you don't...
So have Palestine Action.
Sorry?
Does Palestine Action do that? After their actions, they would stick around?
For some of them, I think they have, yeah. And so...
I think for the majority, because if not all of them, as far as I understand, because they claim them, and they, like Just Stop Oil has the orange, uniform, they had the red uniform, and they would sit down and they would wait to get arrested.
And the beautiful framing of an action, 1 or 2 of them that I've seen have been, really had all those markings of non-violence. But, this is where, the downside of non-violence is that although it's incredibly powerful, it's also fragile in terms of how it presents itself. So if if the non-violent discipline isn't absolutely squeaky clean, as it were, then if there's a flaw anywhere, then it starts to slip. And for example, some activists, I'm not talking about Palestine Action, I'm talking in general terms. When people take action, demonstrations or whatever, sometimes people will chant at the police, right? Shout at the police or chant at the police. Now, I'm not going to criticize that on the basis that I don't know what the context was, or who the people were that were doing that. But in terms of our actions in Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain, we would never chant at the police like that. It would. What we try to do when we take action is we try to create what I call a non-violent container. So it's like, it's a container. Of course, you can't see it. It's a metaphor, right? But in that container, you've got this incredible discipline of non-violence that is very difficult for them to shut down. So yes, they arrest us, but we can prepare for that, and we can hold that because we've prepared for it. And because when we're arrested, we're, for the most part, arrested together. And so you get this feeling of, the mutual solidarity of each other taking action. But that non-violent container has to be really free of any kind of anything that could be seen as a provocation, for example. If you take the word provocation, in a way, with the confrontational edge, we do provoke, but we provoke collectively and we don't use violence. If you provoke in a one-on-one situation where you've got a line of activists and a line of police, and they start to provoke by chanting, you've broken that non-violence container. One of the things that we ask, one of the values that we're trying to put forward with our non-violence is trust, right? Now, most activists will talk about how we can't trust the police. In non-violence, we're not concerned. Well, we are concerned with that. Of course, we are concerned with that. But the primary thing that we're concerned about is, can they trust us? We need to make it so that they trust us. And that's radical, because we're upholding a human value that has been thrown out of the window by the predominant culture. But we're trying to bring it back by getting the trust of the police. And you will not get a non-violent victory unless you get defection. And what happens when non-violent resistance works is that you start to get defections. Because...
Okay, I can see that. If we got to a stage where, well, I don't even know where the police... I actually don't even know, because the police should... I personally think the police should be defecting already. I mean, arresting people when they've been marching on the road for 20 seconds under new government regulations is an astonishing breach of our human right. It's literally in the UN Charter of Human Rights, our right to protest. Yeah. But this is the thing about, holding this container and the effectiveness and the reasonableness. Like, we do not exist in a reasonable political system, nor a reasonable economic system. Yeah. Otherwise, it would not be devouring the only habitable planet in the known universe in order to maintain itself. And so I worry about these calls to reason, because that world doesn't exist. The political reality that is reasonable does not exist. The economic reality that is reasonable does not exist in these centralized institutions. I don't mean between people, but in these centralized institutions. Yeah. And I think that's why we've seen, Just Stop Oil were essentially beaten down. Well, I don't mean that to say as in it affected you, but the Tory government did just about everything to make it impossible for Just Stop Oil to take action, to the extent that Roger Hallam and a couple of other of the activists were arrested for attending a Zoom call and thrown in jail for years. Yes. And so in that context, I mean, how then is non-violence maintaining like an effective strategy, if you will?
Because we're willing to accept the consequences of our actions. That has to be part of what we're doing. And it's a tough call. It's a big ask. But you ask every one of the Whole Truth 5, as we called them, who refused to be silenced in court and spoke their truth, confrontational edge again, right? They confronted the judge with, I took an oath to tell the whole truth, I'm going to tell it, and that's what they were put in prison for such a long time for, because they really wound the judge up. But you ask every one of those five people, no regrets. They still stand by what they did, even though they went to prison for a long time and had a really tough time. So that has to be part of it.
Let me come in here. I believe you. If you ask any one of those people, they have a moral clarity and they get to stand in that moral clarity. But what does them being in jail achieve? And how have they changed the public discourse? Or how have they changed public opinion? Because Just Stop Oil rattled the public. People were not happy with the sort of repeated actions that were taking place on people's streets, not in the halls of power, but on people's streets.
Yes. Oh, there's lots of things to respond to.
This is so good.
This is great. I'm really appreciating how we're trying to get to the truth of things. It's great.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Okay. Just backtracking a little bit. I mentioned about the democracy, that there needs to be a democracy. A pretend democracy will do nicely, and that's what we have in Britain at the moment. We have a pretend democracy. In the US, even that has gone. Trump doesn't even pretend anymore. That's how the hell that is people are living in there. Out there, is I mean, I don't know how. It'd be very difficult to use non-violence in that situation. I think it may be possible, but as long as you've got this pretend democracy, you can work with that, because you can still expose them. And what we've seen happening in recent months, most recent months, is that the harsh sentences have dropped, and the sentences are still sentences, right? But they're starting to ease off on the length of the sentences.
We do exist in a world right now where international law is being disregarded with an act of genocide, and nothing is being done about it.
I know. But there's still a pretend international law, right? There's still a pretense of it.
Is there?
Well,
where?
Yeah, it's a pretense. Like I said, it isn't there. It clearly isn't there with the genocide in Palestine. But there's still attempts to pretend that it's there. That's what I'm talking about. And, in terms of winning, wins don't come immediately. They take time to emerge. With the fantastic victory of the Hawk action, it took a year before. I mean, it was quick, actually. That was really quick. We had the Nobel Peace Prizes to those two resistance leaders in a year, and then East Timor liberated in 3 years. It's rare to get such a quick victory. And I know that we don't have a lot of time here, because we're already, it's already unraveling. But still, we're not gonna get victories very quickly. We've had the victory of no more new oil licenses, so that was a victory. We still have a way to go, of course, but we're not going to defeat this in next year, or it's going to take some time. But the same would be true with violence. That also takes some time, and sometimes violence does win, but even when it does, it generally also takes time. So
okay, the example of the brilliant action that you performed with your colleagues, peers, fellow activists, your fellow women.
Sisters. My sisters.
Your sisters on the Hawk jet. I am very conscious of how that would have been taking place in a different political context globally, and how, we do not exist in the same context that we even did 2 years ago, since prior to October 2023. And also we exist in a different context with regards to governments and militaries around the world becoming aware of resource scarcity and now implementing violence as a means of securing more resources in order to prop up these bloated, gross, centralized institutions. And so it's this thing again about, like, what is the actual And we won't know this until we look back in history. But what is the actual political context that we do exist in? And what are the strategies that could be designed here, for example, that will work here? Because I think that we probably live in a world now where things that would have worked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, some of them may no longer be relevant because we are seeing a very violent resource scramble, multiple genocides around the world, the throwing of the international rule book out of the window, the upturning of, the global world order, the collapse of Western hegemony, and in its death rattle, it is sort of reaching out and trying to grab anything it can in order to hold on. Yeah. The rolling back of women's reproductive rights, illegalizing women's rights to choose in the United States, El Salvador, Poland, Nicaragua. There are things that previously felt unimaginable, which are imaginable. The state is absolutely willing to enact violence on the bodies of its subjects because it has gained its power from enacting violence upon the bodies of its subjects and upon bodies of the earth as well, and our kinfolk. And so, again, this is just where I keep getting back to. It feels now like we are in a situation of very necessary collective self-defense. And to be very clear, I don't know what that looks like. I really don't know what it looks like. Given the opportunity, there's probably a couple of people out there in the world that I'd like to sit down and give a really good talking to, and maybe, not let them out the room until they'd agreed to, stop. But when I talk about self-defense, it's not because I have an idea in mind or because there's a particularly violent thing that I envision or even fantasize doing, but just that the world has changed. The structures which have kept us safe have changed, and it feels almost dangerous now to pretend, even to continue the pretense of the democracy thing. Like that to me, that feels a little bit dangerous. It feels sort of like pretending that because I live in Britain, my reproductive rights are in no way in danger of being illegalized, And so I just think that I don't know. I mean, I've said it. It's just that there's something in my instinct, there's something in my nerve endings, there's something in the part of me that knows violence. And this is why I'm writing this book, that is going, hold on, because they're showing us that they don't care. And it's not that they don't care because they're evil, but they don't care because they have to keep doing things this way in order to perpetuate themselves, in order to continue surviving. And if it comes at the expense of the rest of us, well, the rest of us be damned.
It's like they're wearing a democracy mask, and the mask is starting to slip, and in non-violence terms, I'm not going to pretend I'm not grasping at straws. I'm grasping at straws. We all are,
Right.
I mean, we are right up against it, and I don't know what's going to work in the end. But the reason I keep putting my faith in non-violence is because, in a way, because we come with trying to uphold human values that should be mattering, and acting in ways that we don't use violence. We're always accountable. By acting in that way, it's almost like, I often use this example of planets, okay? So there's planet non-violence, there's planet violence, and there's planet not being violent. Not being violent is not the same as non-violence. Not being violent is asking the police if you can go on a protest march and then going on a protest march. You're not violent, right? Not being violent, but there's no confrontational edge there. So it's not non-violent. You might as well be waiting for a bus.
Right.
That's not being violent either. Going to sleep is not being violent. When we're non-violent, we have that confrontational edge. So when we bring these higher human values and insist on our humanity and insist on their humanity as well. I insist on their humanity. I'm not going to harm them. I don't want to harm them. I wish them no harm. It's like this gravitational pull towards non-violence starts to exert its force, and anyone that comes into that orbit starts to have to behave like we're behaving. Those kind of dialogues are really worth something, because we're starting to, this is defection. Defection doesn't always look, people throw down their guns and jump over the wall like they did in Berlin. It happened there like that. That was a dramatic way with the Iron Curtain dissolving. But it doesn't usually happen like that. It happens in quite subtle ways, and I've experienced it many times, that defection. So, we might start to be seeing some defection in the way that our non-violent actions are moving forward, and this is what we're going for. And it's like we insist on it with that confrontational edge. You be respectable. I'm being respectable and dignified. You be respectable and dignified as well. Let's all be human here. Let's elevate those human values again. So it's like we're pulling that towards us as much as we can. Meanwhile, planet violence is, exerting its gravitational pull as well and trying to get everybody to be violent. They want us to be violent so they can smash us, and they're trying to smash us with the legal consequences. But because we prepare, because we're together, we're a community, we can handle that just about. I mean, I say that I've risked prison many times. I've never actually been to prison. I'm terrified of it. And I'm not taking action currently that risks prison. So, I step up to my own limits there. And recognise we all have limits, of course, and they must be respected, So nobody who takes the actions that we're doing takes them without a lot of preparation, a lot of making sure that they can handle what might be coming. So we will ask people not to take action if we think they're not going to be safe,
You know what I would like, Ron? I would like the definitions of violence and non-violence to expand somewhat. I would love to live in a world where a collective public consciousness understands that being policed is a form of violence, that the law as it currently exists and the way it currently exists is a form of violence. And this isn't my riffing. There was a legal scholar, an American legal scholar in the 70s called Robert Cover, who showed that the court's ability to separate a person from their life, from their relationships, and to lock them up, to physically remove them and lock them up, is a form of violence.
Yeah, it is.
And it is a sanctioned form of violence, and it is absurd that the law functions in this way, essentially. So I would like for there to be more of an understanding of the violences that are enacted against us, whether against protesters, non-violent protesters, who are then met with violence by the state, or against, our literal planet Earth, the lands, the oceans, whether it's the pollution, the extractivism, the extraction, the exploitation, that is a form of violence against our collective body. I would also like for the public consciousness of terms to understand that there are contexts in which self-defense, as a collective movement even, is absolutely defensible, that sometimes it is necessary, and that defending your home or defending your loved ones is not perhaps is not inherently violent.
I think we've agreed that. I think.
Oh yeah, I just mean I would like the political context of
the situation,
because I think this is what you're up against as activists, right? Where people think it's completely normal, it's allowed, it's okay, that police are doing their jobs, that there's no violence being enacted upon you if you're arrested or if you're thrown in jail, that's just the way of the world. I would like for it to be kind of understood as a violence, for it to be understood as unacceptable. I would like for people to look at polluted riverways and understand that as a violence.
Yes.
And not just against that river, but also against us and our ability to live and to thrive,
Yes.
Yes. That's what I mean.
I mean, I agree. I mean, the legal system, the punishment system, it's inhuman, And we make ourselves vulnerable to that when we take non-violent action. By bringing our vulnerability, we, to some degree, can expose that. So, you know, we had this woman in her 70s who's, you know, her wrists were so thin. You know, you sometimes get quite thin, don't you, when you're older? Her wrists were so thin that they couldn't put a tag on her wrist. Because they wanted to, they were going to release her from prison. She was in prison.
Yeah.
They were going to release her, and they couldn't get this on her wrist. And so they kept her in. And it was inhuman.
Oh my God.
It was inhuman. But we got so much in the press about that, and people recognised, here's this woman in her 70s, absolutely non-violent. You know, a beautiful person, intelligent, and, you know, very difficult. And I'm not saying that you have to be a beautiful, you know, person to be able to be released. But what I'm saying is that the fact of the sort of person that she was created that confrontation with the powers that was more effective in exposing their injustice. I mean, it should be the case for everyone in prison. You know, nobody should be in prison. We should have a better system, but you know, we can't fight all battles at once. You know, I mean, we can as we come across them. So when we are in prison, we do try to expose the violence of that system, and also the fact that it's not effective, because of course, you know, there's always going to be criminals. You know, people that do bad stuff, and of course we need to find ways to alleviate that so that people aren't at risk. But, you know, doing it by imprisoning people is not the way to do it, you know.
Yeah. Rowan, this has been such a good conversation, and I'm so grateful to you for coming onto the show and for going through it with me and for leaning into the points of resistance and tension and friction that comes from holding slightly different viewpoints, or even wanting to, how do I put it? You've shown a real grace and humility with me also challenging you based on the fact that you have taken actions too. You know, it's not just that I'm asking you to defend your beliefs, but also I'm asking you to talk through your actions. And so you've shown nothing but humility and vulnerability here as well. And I'm really, really grateful to you for this, because I feel in my bones that this is such an important conversation, and I'm desperate to have it with absolutely everyone. And so I just think that this has been wonderful. I really am so grateful to you. My final question is, who would you like to platform?
Oh, that's easy. Sally Davidson.
Who?
Sally Davidson.
Sally Davidson.
She was one of the Heathrow 9 who took action last summer with Just Stop Oil. And she's such an amazing person. And she absolutely embodies nonviolence. She holds that confrontational edge beautifully with so much grace. She would be a great person for you to interview. And she's right. She's much more up there on the edge of things with Just Stop Oil than I have been, because I'm mainly focused around the practice of nonviolence. You know, although I take action myself. But yeah, she's up there.
Great. Well, I will reach out to her. Rowan, thank you again.
I can put you in contact.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
If you want to learn more, I've put links to everything in the description box below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and share the episode if you enjoyed it. To support the show, subscribe at planetcritical.com, where you can read the weekly newsletter. You can also become a Planet Critical patron. All links are in the description box below. As always, my deepest thanks to that community. Planet Critical wouldn't exist without your support. Thank you everyone for listening and for coming on this journey together.